With the dismissal letter in hand, a furious millionaire goes to the house of his employee who has missed work for days. Upon forcing his way into the small apartment, he encounters a scene that leaves him speechless. A little girl, burning with fever, sitting in front of a sewing machine. "Sir, it's been 2 days since Mum won't wake up, but don't worry, I'll finish sewing the dress for your store," says the child in a weak voice. When he asks to see the child's mother, he is horrified by the scene and calls emergency services immediately. The roar of the red Ferrari's engine echoed through the narrow streets of Prospect Heights, a stark contrast to the modest neighborhood around it. Ricardo Mendez, CEO of the prestigious fashion label Haute Couture, gripped the steering wheel, so tightly his knuckles turned white. His eyes, normally cold and calculating, blazed with anger as he searched for the address of his most talented employee, Helena Santos. 3 days. 3 days without showing up for work, no call, no explanation. And now the exclusive gown for Mariana Alvarez, an influencer with over 10 million followers, was late. The piece should have been delivered yesterday morning, and the client was already threatening to expose the situation on her social media. Ricardo couldn't allow his reputation for excellence, built over 2 decades, to be tarnished by one employee's irresponsibility. The termination packet on his lap felt like lead. Inside, all the necessary documents to end Helena's contract, including a severance agreement offering 3 months' salary, more than enough in Ricardo's opinion, considering the breach of trust. He parked abruptly in front of a small 3-story apartment building, ignoring the curious stare of an old woman sweeping the sidewalk. "Apartment 302, he muttered, double-checking the address provided by HR. He climbed the stairs quickly, his Italian leather shoes echoing on the concrete steps. The dimly lit hallway made him wrinkle his nose. How could one of his best seamstresses live in such a run-down place? He knocked on the door once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. The silence only fueled his irritation. That's when he remembered the spare key Sandra, the factory manager, had given him earlier. "Just in case of emergency, Mr. Mendez. Helena's always been so dedicated. Something serious must have happened." After a moment's hesitation, he inserted the key into the lock. The apartment was plunged into an unsettling silence, broken only by the distant hum of a sewing machine. Ricardo frowned, following the sound. What he found in the small living room left him paralyzed. A little girl, no more than 8 years old, was sitting at the professional-grade sewing machine, the same kind the company provided to its employees for at-home work. Her face was flushed with fever, and her small, trembling hands were trying to manipulate the delicate fabric of the dress that should have been delivered. "Mister," she said weakly without taking her eyes off her work, "Mommy hasn't woken up for 2 days, but don't worry, I'm going to finish sewing the dress for your store." Ricardo's world seemed to spin. The termination packet slipped from his hands, scattering papers across the floor. His gaze swept the room. Dirty dishes in the sink, medicine on the table, a crumpled overdue rent notice. On the wall, a calendar marked with overtime hours and production targets. "Where's your mother?" he asked, his voice losing all its previous firmness. "In the bedroom," the girl replied, pausing for a moment to cough. "She's really hot, like I was before. But I'm better now, just a little dizzy. I promise I'll finish. The dress today, mister. Mummy always says we can't be late with deliveries, or else—" Ricardo didn't wait for her to finish. He rushed to the bedroom and found Helena lying in bed, burning with fever, her breathing irregular and shallow. Her face, usually so serene and focused during work, was contorted in an expression of pain. With trembling hands, he grabbed his cell phone and dialed 911. While he waited, his eyes fell on the nightstand. A photo of Helena with her daughter, both smiling, and beside it, a pile of pharmacy receipts and a notebook with detailed expense entries. The words, "Can't get sick," were written and underlined several times. The sound of the sewing machine continued in the living room, a constant, reminder of a child's desperate dedication to save her mother's job. Ricardo felt something break inside him. Perhaps it was his unwavering certainty that business success justified any sacrifice, or perhaps it was simply his armor of emotional coldness, built over years of tough decisions and sacrificed relationships. The siren of the ambulance began to wail in the distance, and Ricardo realized that his life, so meticulously controlled until that moment, was about to change forever. The medical team arrived in minutes that felt like hours. Ricardo watched helpless as the paramedics examined Helena and prepared her for transport. The girl, whose name he learned was Laura, clung to the fabric of the unfinished dress as if it were a security blanket. "I need to go with Mommy," she insisted, her small hands still clutching the needle. "I have to finish the dress." Ricardo knelt beside her, ignoring the fact that his $1,000 Italian trousers were touching the dusty floor. "Laura," he said, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. "Right now, the most important thing is to take care of you. And your mum. Forget the dress." "But you're going to fire her," Laura exclaimed, tears streaming down her feverish face. "I heard her when she was on the phone with Aunt Sandra. She said she couldn't miss work, that you don't accept delays, that she needed to finish the famous lady's dress." Every word was like a stab to Ricardo's chest. Was this how his employees saw him? As a ruthless tyrant who forced them to work even when sick? He looked at Laura's small hands, calloused from watching and trying to imitate her mother's work. How many nights had this child spent watching Helena work late to meet the impossible targets he set? "Ma'am," one of the paramedics began, addressing Ricardo, "we need to take the patient now. Her fever is very high and we suspect pneumonia." "She's not my—" Ricardo started to correct, then stopped when he saw Laura's frightened look. "I'm her boss. This is her daughter. The girl needs to be examined too," the paramedic said, noticing Laura's feverish state. "Who will be responsible for her?" Ricardo opened his mouth to say he'd call Child Protective Services, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he heard himself say, "I'll take care of her." On the way to the hospital, sitting in the front of the ambulance with Laura asleep on his lap, Ricardo discovered more about his employee's life through the documents and notes he had hastily gathered from the apartment. Helena was a single mother. Her ex-husband had abandoned the family years ago, and she was practically raising Laura alone, relying only on occasional help from a neighbor. The notes in the ledger revealed a daily struggle to balance the books: overdue rent, medication for Laura, school supplies on an installment plan. And yet, amidst all the difficulties, Helena had never delivered a flawed piece, never complained about overtime, never failed to smile when given more work. In the ER, while doctors attended to mother and daughter, Ricardo made dozens of calls. He cancelled all his meetings for the day, instructed his assistant to issue a press release about the delay in delivering Mariana Alvarez's dress, and for the first time in his career admitted he had made a mistake. "Sandra," he told the factory manager, "I want a full audit of working conditions, overtime, production targets, everything, and suspend the penalty system for delays immediately." "But Mr. Mendez," she protested, the shareholders didn't see an 8-year-old girl trying to sew a couture gown because her mother was unconscious with fever," he exploded, startling a passing nurse. Lowering his voice, he continued, "Just do what I'm asking, Sandra. Things are going to change. Starting today." Hours passed and finally the doctor came to speak with him. Helena had severe pneumonia, aggravated by physical exhaustion. Laura had a bad flu, but would respond well to treatment. Both would be admitted. "Are you a relative?" the doctor asked. Ricardo looked through the ICU window where Helena was connected to several machines. He remembered all the times he had praised her for her dedication, without ever asking how she managed to maintain that level of productivity. How many other Helenas were there in his factory, sacrificing their health and their families to keep their jobs? "No," he replied. "I'm just someone who needs to fix a lot of things." That night, sitting beside Laura's bed, who had insisted he not leave, Ricardo found the old business card he used to carry. On it, his personal motto read, "Success at any cost." With a weary sigh, he tore the card into small pieces and threw them in the trash. The cost, he had finally realized, was far too high. The news that Ricardo Mendez, the ruthless CEO of Haute Couture, was personally accompanying a sick employee and her daughter at the hospital spread quickly. The next morning, his personal assistant, Beatrice, arrived at the hospital carrying a stack of documents and a worried look. "The lawyers are frantic," she informed him, handing him a coffee. "They say taking responsibility for the girl could lead to serious legal trouble, and Mariana Alvarez is threatening to make a video exposing the delay of the dress." Ricardo, who had spent the entire night in an uncomfortable armchair beside Laura's bed, merely nodded. His back ached, his shirt was wrinkled, and for the first time in years, his impeccable appearance was not his main concern. "Cancel the contract with Mariana Alvarez," he said, surprising Beatrice, "and refund the full amount for the dress, with a 30% bonus for the inconvenience. But sir, she's one of our top influencers. Her reach means nothing compared to a child's life," Ricardo interrupted, watching Laura sleep. During the night, she had told him how she learned to sew, sitting on the apartment floor, watching her mother work late. "Tell the lawyers I'm not abandoning this girl in a shelter while her mother's in the ICU." Beatrice hesitated, biting her lip. "There's one more thing. The board has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. They're questioning your emotional stability to lead the company." Ricardo laughed humorlessly. "My emotional stability? Maybe they should question our moral stability as a company. Did you know our seamstresses work sick because they're afraid of losing their jobs, that their daughters grow up watching their mothers work themselves to death?" Before Beatrice could reply, Laura woke up coughing. Ricardo immediately stood up to help her drink some water, surprised by the naturalness of the gesture. In less than 24 hours, this child had demolished decades of walls he had built around his heart. "Uncle Ricardo," she called hoarsely, "can I see Mommy today?" "Not yet, sweetie. The doctors are taking care of her so she can get well soon." He adjusted her blanket. "But you know what we can do? Tell her later how brave you were." "I'm not brave," Laura murmured, tears welling in her eyes. "I couldn't finish the dress. Mommy's going to lose her job, and we'll have to move again." Ricardo sat on the edge of the bed, ignoring Beatrice's astonished look at seeing him show such care. "Laura, listen carefully. Your mom isn't going to lose her job. In fact, when she gets better, I'm giving her a promotion." The girl's eyes widened. "Really? Even without finishing the famous lady's dress?" "Really. And you know why? Because your mom is much more valuable than any dress." He paused, choosing his words. "And you taught me that." Beatrice discreetly wiped away a tear while organizing the documents she had brought. "Mr. Mendez, I need your guidance on the board meeting." "Tell them I'll be there," he replied, without taking his eyes off Laura, who had fallen back asleep. "But first, I need you to do a few things. Contact Human Resources and request a complete survey of all our employees who are single mothers. I want to know their working conditions, salaries, overtime hours." "Yes, sir. Anything else?" Ricardo stood up, feeling every sore muscle protest. "Yes. Call our team of architects. I want a plan to build a daycare center within the factory and find the best labor attorney in the city. We're going to review all our contracts." "But sir, these changes will cost millions. The shareholders will have to understand that the real cost is in continuing to ignore the humanity of our employees." He looked at his reflection in the hospital window, the wrinkled suit, the stubble, the tired but determined eyes. "You know, Beatrice, I spent 20 years building a luxury brand, forgetting that true luxury is being able to care for those we love." Just then, a nurse rushed into the room. "Mr. Mendez, it's about the girl's mother. There's been a complication." Ricardo's heart pounded as he followed the nurse down the white ICU corridors. Through the glass, he could see the medical team around Helena's bed, moving urgently. One of the machines emitted a sharp, insistent beep. "Her fever spiked in the last few hours," explained the attending physician, Dr. Evans, as soon as she saw him. "And we found something concerning in her blood work and chest X-ray. Mr. Mendez, do you know what kind of chemicals are used in treating the fabrics at your factory?" The question hit Ricardo like a punch to the gut. Of course he knew. It was his competitive edge, imported textiles, treated with special products that guaranteed a perfect drape and exceptional durability. Products that, he had always known, weren't exactly safe. But the employees wore masks, didn't they? The fabrics. They're treated with a proprietary mix of fixatives and preservatives, he admitted, his voice trembling. "That's why we require the use of masks during handling." Dr. Evans frowned. "Mr. Mendez, we found alarming levels of toxins in your employees' system. The simple industrial-grade masks used in such environments aren't sufficient for this level of exposure. Helena has likely been breathing these substances for years, especially if she often worked from home without adequate ventilation." Ricardo staggered, needing to lean against the wall. He remembered the small apartment, the window that barely opened, the sewing machine set up in the tightest corner of the room. Helena probably sewed for hours on end in that enclosed space, breathing in the chemicals he insisted on using to maintain his profit margins. Will she be okay?" was all he could manage to ask. "We're doing our best, but I have to be honest, her condition is serious. The years of exposure have caused significant damage to her respiratory system. Even if she recovers from this crisis, she may have permanent sequelae." Ricardo returned to Laura's room like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The girl was still asleep, and he was grateful for that. How could he explain to her that his obsession with perfection and profit had literally poisoned her mother? Beatrice, waiting for him in the hallway, immediately sensed something was wrong. "Sir? What happened?" "Call the purchasing department," he ordered, his voice choked. "Cancel all orders for those special fabrics immediately. All of them. And contact that environmental consulting firm that approached us last year, the one we wanted for green certification. The one you said was too expensive?" "Exactly. Schedule a meeting for today. And one more thing." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of nervousness he never allowed others to see. "I need you to find the best pulmonary specialist in the country. Money is no object." At that moment, Laura began to stir in her bed, murmuring in her sleep. Ricardo rushed to her side, holding her small, warm hand. The gesture, which would have been unthinkable for him 2 days ago, now felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Mommy, it's so hot. Noisy machine," the girl mumbled, reliving in her dreams the long nights beside her tirelessly working mother. "Shh. It's okay," Ricardo whispered, stroking her hair. "You're safe now. And I promise, Laura, I promise I'll fix everything." Beatrice watched the scene with tears in her eyes. In 15 years as Ricardo's assistant, she had never seen him display such humanity. "The board meeting," she reminded him softly. "It's in 2 hours." Ricardo nodded without letting go of Laura's hand. "I'll need you here with her while I'm at the meeting, and I also need you to prepare some numbers for me. I want to know exactly how much it would cost to replace all our materials with safe, sustainable alternatives. But that will drastically reduce our profit. The shareholders will have to understand that we can't build a successful company on the suffering of our employees." he interrupted, his voice carrying a determination Beatrice had never heard before. If they don't understand, well, maybe it's time to rethink who should be on the board. As he watched Laura sleep, Ricardo made a silent vow. No matter the cost, no matter how many millions he would have to invest or how many shareholders he would have to confront, he would transform his company into a place where no other mother would have to choose between health and work, where no other child would have to grow up watching her mother slowly wither away because of toxic products. The haute couture building gleamed against the afternoon sky, its glass walls reflecting the setting sun. Ricardo entered through the back door, avoiding the curious glances of employees. His wrinkled suit and stubble were a stark contrast to the luxurious environment he himself had created. In the elevator, he caught himself observing his distorted reflection in the polished metal. For 2 decades, his image had been his armor: impeccable suits, perfectly styled hair, a controlled expression. Now, for the first time, he wondered if all that perfection hadn't just been a mask to hide his own emptiness. The boardroom was packed when he entered. The board members, all in their expensive suits and grave expressions, fell silent immediately. At the head of the table, Giorgio Valentini, his partner and friend of 20 years, stared at him with a mixture of concern and disapproval. "Ricardo," Giorgio began, his voice tinged with an Italian accent, "sit down. We need to discuss your current situation." Ricardo remained standing, his hands resting on the mahogany table. "Before we begin, I have something to show you." He signaled to Beatrice, who had arrived minutes earlier, and she distributed folders to those present. "What's this?" asked one of the shareholders, leafing through the documents. "This," Ricardo replied, his voice firm, "is the true cost of our success. These are medical reports, chemical analyses of our imported fabrics, studies on the effects of prolonged exposure to the products we use. And this..." He projected a photo of Helena in the ICU onto the screen. "This is one of our best employees, fighting for her life, because we decided that a few extra percentage points of profit were worth more than her health." A murmur of discomfort rippled through the room. Giorgio stood up, agitated. "Ricardo, you're being emotional. Our practices are within industry standards. All the major brands are wrong." Ricardo slammed his hand on the table, making the coffee cups tremble. "I was in her apartment, Giorgio. I saw her 8-year-old daughter trying to finish a dress because her mother was unconscious with fever. A child breathing those toxic fumes, determined to save her. Mother's job, because she knew that we would show no mercy." "This is regrettable," interjected a female shareholder, adjusting her gold-rimmed glasses, "but we cannot base business decisions on isolated cases. The numbers from last quarter..." Isolated cases. Ricardo projected more images onto the screen. "Beatrice spent all night gathering data. We have 53 seamstresses who are single mothers, 37 reported respiratory problems last year, 22 work from home in inadequately ventilated environments because they can't afford better spaces with the wages we pay." The ensuing silence was heavy. Ricardo continued, his voice softer now. "We built this company promising luxury and exclusivity. But what kind of luxury is sustained by the suffering of mothers and children? What kind of exclusivity excludes the very humanity of our employees?" Giorgio approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Ricardo, my friend, I understand your concern, but the changes you propose would cost millions. The shareholders won't accept. Then they can buy my share," Ricardo interrupted, causing more murmurs in the room. "I'll sell my shares if necessary, use the money to create a new production line, totally sustainable and ethical." "You've gone mad," Giorgio exclaimed. 2 decades of work. 2 decades of exploitation," Ricardo corrected. "But that ends today. I have a complete restructuring plan." replacement of toxic materials with sustainable alternatives, installation of an industrial ventilation system throughout the factory, construction of a daycare for employees, review of all contracts. "And where will the money for all this come from?" questioned another shareholder. Ricardo straightened his posture, his eyes shining with determination. "I'll sell my penthouse apartment, my car collection, reduce my own salary by 70%. And as for the rest," he smiled for the first time since entering the room, "well, maybe it's time our brand became exclusive, not just for the products we make, but for the way we treat those who make them." At that moment, his cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Beatrice, who had stayed at the hospital. "Laura is asking for you, and the doctors, they need to talk about Helena urgently." Ricardo practically flew down the hospital corridors, his heart hammering in his chest. The elevator seemed slower than ever, and every second of waiting was torture. When he finally reached the ICU floor, he found Dr. Evans waiting for him with a grave expression. "We managed to stabilize her fever," she began, leading him to a private room. "But the tests revealed something more serious. The prolonged exposure to chemicals has caused significant pulmonary fibrosis." "In plain English, doctor, please." Ricardo's voice was barely a whisper. "Her lungs are scarred, Mr. Mendez. Permanent scars caused by the continuous inhalation of toxic substances. Even after she recovers from this crisis, she will never be able to work with those products again. In fact, any work involving chemicals or dust is out of the question." Ricardo closed his eyes, feeling the weight of every word. Helena had been a seamstress since she was 15. It was more than her profession. It was her passion, her art. And now, because of his greed, she was being forced to abandon it all. "Is there treatment?" "Yes, but it's long and expensive. She'll need specific medications, respiratory therapy, constant monitoring, and even then, she'll never recover 100% of her lung capacity." Before Ricardo could respond, he heard a commotion. In the hallway, Laura's voice, mixed with Beatrice's, sounded agitated. He quickly left the room to find the girl trying to break free from his assistant. I heard them saying Mommy won't be able to sew anymore," Laura screamed, tears streaming down her face. "It's all your fault. You and your ugly store." "Hurt my mom." The words hit Ricardo harder than any physical blow. He knelt in front of Laura, ignoring the stares of other patients and hospital staff. "You're right," he admitted, his voice choked. "It's my fault. I was a very bad man for a long time, Laura. I only thought about money and forgot that my employees are people, are mothers, are people," Laura completed, sobbing. "Mommy always said you were a robot, that you only cared about the pretty dresses." Ricardo felt his own tears begin to fall. "I was a robot, but you and your mother taught me to be human again. And I promise, Laura, I promise on my life that I'll fix everything." "How?" the girl asked, still suspicious but no longer trying to flee. "Mommy can't make the pretty dresses anymore. It's the only thing she knows how to do. She taught me that. Every stitch is like a little piece of love sewn into the fabric." At that moment, an idea began to form in Ricardo's mind. He took out his cell phone and quickly dialed Giorgio. "Cancel the board meeting," he ordered, as soon as his partner answered. "I have a different proposal. Gather everyone at the factory in an hour, and call all the seamstresses too, especially those who work from home." Turning to Laura, he asked, "Want to help me do something special for your mom?" The girl sniffled, wiping her nose on the sleeve of her hospital pajamas. "What? We're going to create a place where your mom can continue doing what she loves, but in a different way. A place where no one else will get hurt or sick. Will you help me?" For the first time in days, a small smile appeared on Laura's face. "Can I bring the dress I was making?" "You can. In fact, that dress is going to be very important for what I'm planning." Beatrice, who had been watching the scene in silence, finally spoke. "Sir, What exactly are you planning? Ricardo stood up, a determined glint in his eyes. A revolution, Beatrice. We're going to transform haute couture, not just into a clothing brand, but into a symbol of change. And we'll start, he smiled at Laura, with an imperfect dress made by a child who taught me more about love and dedication than 20 years of high fashion. In the ICU room, through the glass, Helena seemed to be sleeping a little more peacefully, as if somehow she knew that her life and her daughter's were about to change forever. The haute couture factory had never seen a meeting like it. In the large main hall, chairs were arranged in a circle, mixing executives in expensive suits with seamstresses still in their work uniforms. Laura, sitting beside Ricardo, held the unfinished dress on her lap as if it were a precious treasure. Everyone here knows the story of our brand, Ricardo began, his voice echoing in the silent hall. We started 20 years ago with a promise to create the most exclusive clothes on the market, and we succeeded. But today I discovered that the price of that exclusivity was too high. He paused, his eyes scanning the faces of the seamstresses, faces that he realized with shame he had never truly looked at before. Helena Santos, one of our finest artisans, is in an ICU right now. Her lungs are irreversibly damaged by the chemicals we use in our fabrics. And she's not the only one. He gestured to some of the seamstresses present. How many of you have felt short of breath? How many have had to choose between taking a child to the doctor or meeting a production target? Hands began to rise timidly. An older seamstress, Ms. Marcia, stood up with tears in her eyes. My daughter started here too, Mr. Mendez. She had to stop when her bronchitis got worse. Today, she sells cosmetics door to door. Other stories began to emerge, years of silence and fear being broken by an avalanche of testimonies. Ricardo listened to every word, feeling the weight of his negligence increase with each account. Enough, he finally said, his voice firm but gentle. Enough sacrificing lives for profit. Starting today, haute couture is going to change, and I want to begin by showing you something special. He signaled to Laura, who shyly stood up with the dress. Giorgio, sitting among the executives, frowned. Ricardo, isn't that Mariana Alvarez's dress? What's a child? Yes, this is the dress that should have been delivered 3 days ago, Ricardo interrupted. When I found Helena sick, her 8-year-old daughter was trying to finish it to save her mother's job. Look closely at this dress, please. The seamstresses approached, examining Laura's work. The stitches were uneven, the finishing imperfect, but there was something special about the piece. Every crooked stitch in this dress tells a story, Ricardo continued. The story of a girl who learned to sew by watching her mother work late. The story of a love so great it made her face a sewing machine even when she was sick. This isn't just an imperfect dress. It's a manifesto. He stood up, walking to the center of the circle. Starting today, we're launching a new line, Stitches from the Heart. Each piece will be unique, not because it's perfect, but because it will tell the story of the person who made it. We'll use only sustainable materials, natural dyes. Our labels will bear the name of the seamstress who made the piece, her story, her art. A buzz of excitement swept through the hall. The seamstresses exchanged hopeful glances while the executives whispered among themselves. More than that, Ricardo continued, we're going to transform this building. The 3rd floor, where my office used to be, will be converted into a daycare center. The 2nd floor will have a sewing school where our most experienced artisans can teach their techniques. And to start, he smiled at Laura, I want the first dress in this new collection to be this one. Exactly as it is. Giorgio stood up, agitated. You're going to put an imperfect dress made by a child as the flagship of a haute couture collection? It's madness. No, Giorgio. Madness is what we were doing before. This dress Ricardo took the piece from Laura's hands with reverence. This dress is worth more than all our previous collections combined, because it wasn't made out of obligation or fear. It was made out of love. Laura, who had remained quiet until then, surprised everyone by speaking. "Mommy always says we sew love into every stitch. She taught me that. Even when a stitch comes out crooked, if it was made with love, it has value." An emotional silence filled the hall. Ricardo noticed several seamstresses discreetly wiping away tears. Even some of the executives seemed touched. "So," he concluded, "who's with me on this change?" Hands began to rise, one after another, until practically everyone in the hall was in agreement. A new era was beginning at haute couture, and its symbol would be an imperfect dress sewn by a child who taught a millionaire the true meaning of value. The news of haute couture's transformation spread rapidly through the media. "Millionaire revolutionizes fashion industry after discovering sick child sewing" was the headline of the day. Some outlets painted Ricardo as a hero seeking redemption. Others questioned if it wasn't just a marketing ploy. But none of that mattered to him. That morning, as he walked through the hospital corridors with a smile on his face, Helena had woken up. "Good morning," he said softly, entering the ICU room after receiving medical clearance. "Someone here is anxious to see you." Laura, who was holding his hand, let go and ran to her mother's bed. Helena, still pale and connected to a few machines, managed a weak smile upon seeing her daughter. Her voice was just a hoarse whisper. "My love, I'm sorry I scared you." "Mommy," Laura began to cry, hugging her mother carefully. "I tried to finish the dress, but it didn't turn out as pretty as yours." Helena looked at Ricardo, who remained discreetly at the entrance of the room. Her eyes revealed a mixture of fear and confusion. "Mr. Mendez, I apologize for the delay in delivery. As soon as I get better—" "No," Ricardo interrupted her gently, approaching the bed. "I'm the one who needs to apologize, Helena. For all these years, I didn't want to see, how much I was harming you all." He sat in the chair beside the bed, choosing his words carefully. "Helena, you're not going back to that role. Not because you're fired, but because I have other plans. Plans that, in fact, were inspired by your daughter." Laura, still nestled in her mother's arms, lifted her head curiously. Helena frowned, confused. "I don't understand." Ricardo then told her everything. The dress Laura tried to finish, the discovery of the working conditions, the meeting at the factory, the new plans for the company. With each revelation, Helena's eyes filled more with tears. "But what about my job? I can't sew anymore. The doctor said my lungs—" "You're going to be our new director of training," Ricardo announced, surprising both mother and daughter. "We're creating a sewing school within the factory. I want you to teach, share your experience. Your talent is too precious to be lost." Helena covered her mouth with her hands, crying openly now. Laura jumped with joy beside the bed. "See, Mommy? Now you're going to be a teacher, just like you taught me to sew." At that moment, Beatrice entered the room, carrying a folder. "Mr. Mendez, sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation." She hesitated, looking at Helena and Laura. "Helena's ex-husband is at the reception, and he brought a lawyer." The smile vanished from Helena's face, replaced by an expression of panic. "Roberto? But he disappeared 2 years ago." "He saw the news," Beatrice explained softly. "He's threatening to sue the company for emotional distress and demanding custody of Laura." "No!" Laura screamed, clinging to her mother. "I don't want to go with him. He yells, he drinks—" Ricardo stood up, a calm determination on his face. "Helena, do you trust me?" She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "You saved my life. You saved my daughter. And now you're changing everything to protect other mothers. Yes, I trust you. Then leave this to me. He smiled, adjusting his suit jacket. Beatrice, call Rachel Sterling, our lawyer. Tell her I need her here in 15 minutes. And also bring all of Helena's medical files, especially the tests showing the damage caused by the chemicals. What are you going to do? Laura asked, still clinging to her mother. Ricardo knelt beside the bed, bringing himself to the girl's eye level. I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago, protect my family. The words came out naturally, surprising even himself. But it was true. At some point during those intense days, Helena and Laura had become more than employees or a case of conscience. They were his family, and he would protect this family with all his strength. Beatrice, he called, already leaving the room, prepare the documents for the company's new project as well. We're going to show Mr. Roberto exactly what he's trying to destroy. As he walked towards the reception, Ricardo felt a different kind of strength within him. It was no longer the cold strength of business, but something deeper, more human. It was the strength that came from finally doing the right thing. Roberto Silva was not what Ricardo expected. Tall and well-dressed, he seemed to have made an effort to appear respectable, but his red, restless eyes betrayed sleepless nights. Beside him, a lawyer in a cheap suit clutched a battered briefcase. Mr. Mendez, the lawyer. Mr. Peterson began as Ricardo approached. I'm representing Mr. Silva. My client wishes to discuss the situation of his daughter and ex-wife. Ricardo remained calm, observing how Roberto couldn't stop fidgeting with his poorly adjusted tie. Of course, but let's wait for my lawyer to arrive. She's on her way. We don't need a lawyer! Roberto suddenly exploded, his facade of composure crumbling. That's my daughter, and Helena. Helena is sick because of you. Years working with those products, and you... Mr. Silva, Ricardo interrupted him gently. Why don't we sit down? We can discuss this civilly. At that moment, Rachel Sterling arrived, her imposing presence filling the room. Beatrice followed her, carrying a stack of documents. Everyone settled into a private meeting room. Ricardo noticed how Roberto's hands trembled slightly, clear signs of withdrawal he recognized from his years working in fashion and with celebrities. My client, Mr. Peterson began, demands immediate custody of his daughter Laura as well, as substantial compensation for the damages caused to Ms. Helena Santos's health. Interesting, Rachel Sterling replied, her tone professional but sharp. And where was your client for the past 2 years? Roberto shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I was looking for work in other cities. Work? Ricardo finally spoke. Or were you fleeing the 3 domestic violence charges registered by Helena? Roberto's face turned pale. His lawyer seemed equally surprised by the information. How did you... I have resources, Mr. Silva, and unlike you, I use them to protect Helena and Laura, not to try and exploit them. Rachel Sterling opened a folder. We have the police reports here, medical reports of the assaults, and... She paused dramatically. A recent toxicology report from a rehab clinic you attended 3 weeks ago. You abandoned treatment on the 2nd day, didn't you? Roberto stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. You have no right. This is an invasion of privacy. No, Mr. Silva, Ricardo replied calmly. This is protection, something you should have offered your family, but repeatedly failed to do. Beatrice distributed more documents, blueprints of the new factory, daycare designs, updated contracts with expanded benefits. What is this? Mr. Peterson asked, leafing through the papers. The future, Ricardo answered. We are transforming the company. Helena will be our new director of training, with a salary that will allow her and Laura to live a dignified life. We are building a daycare, a sewing school, implementing comprehensive medical care for employees and their families. He leaned forward, staring at Roberto. And do you know why I'm doing this? Because your daughter taught me a lesson that you apparently never learned, the true value of a family. Roberto slumped back into his chair, unexpected tears shining in his eyes. I just wanted to see my daughter. When I saw the news, Helena sick, Laura alone, and your first reaction was to try and get money from the company? Ricardo asked, his voice softer now. Or was that your lawyer's idea? Mr. Peterson began to gather his papers, clearly realizing he had underestimated the situation. Mr. Silva, Ricardo continued, I'm going to make you a proposal. The company will pay for your complete treatment at a rehabilitation clinic. When you've recovered, you can participate in our vocational reintegration program. But, he paused. Significantly, any contact with Helena and Laura will be supervised and will depend on their wishes. Roberto covered his face with his hands, sobbing openly now. I don't deserve... No, you don't, Ricardo agreed. But your daughter deserves to have a recovered father, and Helena deserves peace to heal and rebuild her life. Rachel Sterling was already preparing the necessary documents, while Mr. Peterson silently put away his lawsuit folder. The choice is yours, Mr. Silva, Ricardo concluded. You can try to proceed with a lawsuit that will only hurt your family further, or you can accept our help to finally do the right thing. The silence that followed was broken only by Roberto's restrained sobs. A week had passed since the confrontation with Roberto. The transformation of haute couture was in full swing, with construction happening on every floor of the factory. Helena had been transferred to a private room where she continued her recovery, now attended by a specialized medical team. Ricardo was in his temporary office, a much more modest space than his former one, reviewing the plans for the new daycare when Beatrice entered, carrying a fashion magazine. You need to see this, she said, placing the magazine on his desk. It was the latest issue of Fashion World, the most respected publication in the industry. On the cover, to his surprise, was Laura's unfinished dress, photographed with lighting that highlighted every imperfect stitch, every mark of childish dedication. The headline read, The Revolution of Imperfection, How a Child Transformed High Fashion. That's not all, Beatrice continued, opening the magazine. Mariana Alvarez, that influencer who threatened to sue us? She posted a video last night. Ricardo took the cell phone Beatrice handed him and watched the video. Mariana, known for her impeccable style and scathing critiques, was emotional. My followers, I need to share something with you. Last week, I was ready to destroy haute couture for not delivering my dress on time. Today, I discovered that this delay happened because a seamstress was sick, and her 8-year-old daughter tried to finish the dress to save her mother's job. And do you know what the owner of the brand did? Instead of firing her, he revolutionized the entire company. The video continued, with Mariana detailing the changes and publicly apologizing for her initial reaction. At the end, she made a surprising announcement. That's why I'm proud to say that I will be the face of the new Stitches from the Heart collection. And the first dress I'll wear, that very same one, unfinished, made by a child with so much love that it changed an entire industry. Ricardo put down the cell phone, feeling a different kind of emotion in his chest. It wasn't the vain pride of before, but something deeper, more significant. Beatrice, how is the factory adaptation process going? The construction is ahead of schedule. The ventilation system is already being installed, and the daycare should be ready in 2 weeks, and... She smiled. 5 other brands have already approached us, wanting to know more about our new production model. And the employees. Transformed. You should have seen yesterday's meeting with the seamstresses. They brought family photos, told their stories. Some cried when they learned they could bring their children to the daycare. Ms. Marcia, the one who had to stop sewing because of bronchitis. Her daughter wants to come back, now that we'll only be using natural materials. Ricardo stood up, walking to the window. Down below, he could see workers installing the new safety equipment. A group of seamstresses chatted excitedly during their break, their expressions lighter, happier. And Roberto started treatment yesterday. The clinic says he's committed this time. He asked for this letter to be delivered to Helena. Beatrice placed an envelope on the table. Our psychology team has already reviewed it. There's nothing disturbing. It's basically an apology. Ricardo nodded. Deliver it to Helena. Let her decide if she wants to read it or not. Just then, his cell phone rang. It was Laura. Uncle Ricardo. Her voice was excited. Mommy managed to walk today. Just a little, with help, but she walked. That's wonderful, sweetie. I'm heading over there right now. Bring that pretty folder. The doctor said Mommy can already start making the designs for the sewing school. Ricardo smiled, picking up the project folder he had specially prepared for Helena. Inside, besides the official papers, were dozens of drawings Laura had made, illustrating how she imagined the new school. Of course I'll bring it. And you know what? I think it's time we showed your mom how the dress you made became a magazine. Cover! Laura's shriek of joy was so loud that Beatrice, on the other side of the room, couldn't help but smile. As he headed down to the parking lot, Ricardo realized he no longer missed his old, luxurious office, nor his imported cars. True wealth, he had finally understood, lay in the smiles of the seamstresses, in Helena's renewed hope, in Laura's pure joy. Haute couture was no longer just a luxury brand. It was a movement of transformation. And it all began with a child, who in her innocence and love taught a millionaire that perfection is not in the absence of flaws, but in the presence of humanity. The opening day of the new haute couture arrived amidst unprecedented excitement. The completely renovated building gleamed under the morning sun. Colorful banners proclaimed, "Welcome to the House of Stitches from the Heart." At the entrance, a line of reporters and photographers waited eagerly. Helena, still using a cane but visibly stronger, adjusted the Director of Training ID badge on her new blazer. Beside her, Laura practically bounced with excitement in her specially made blue dress for the occasion. "Mommy, look at all the children!" Indeed, the courtyard was full of employees' children, all dressed in colorful uniforms designed by Helena herself for the new daycare. Some of the older children already proudly carried small sewing kits, ready for their first lessons in the junior sewing school. "Nervous?" Ricardo asked, approaching. Helena, he himself, had ditched his expensive suits for a more accessible, though still elegant look. "A little," she admitted. "I never imagined I'd be on this side of things. You know, giving orders instead of receiving them." "You're not going to give orders," Ricardo corrected gently. "You're going to share knowledge, inspire, transform lives, just like you and Laura transformed mine." Before Helena could reply, Beatrice appeared, flustered as always. "It's time. The journalists are waiting. The employees are in position, and..." She lowered her voice. "Roberto is here." Helena visibly tensed, but Laura surprised everyone by saying, "It's okay, Mommy. The therapist said he's really getting better. And besides," she held Ricardo's hand, "we have a bigger family to protect us now." Ricardo felt his heart tighten at those simple but profound words. 3 months had passed since that fateful morning when he had stormed into Helena's apartment. And now here he was, completely transformed by the love of a child and the courage of a mother. The opening ceremony began with a tour of the new facilities. The journalists were impressed by the state-of-the-art ventilation system, the modern and welcoming daycare, the classrooms equipped with sewing machines adapted for learners of all ages. "And this," Ricardo announced, stopping before a special wall, "is our wall of stories. The wall was covered with photographs and short texts. Every seamstress in the company had her space there, with her story, her inspirations, her struggles and achievements. In the center, prominently displayed, was a photograph of Laura sitting at the sewing machine, concentrating on her work on the unfinished dress. "Every piece we create here will have a special label," Helena explained to the reporters, her voice gaining confidence. "In addition to the usual information, it will tell the story of who made it, because we believe that clothes aren't just fabric and thread, they are life stories sewn with love." A journalist raised her hand. "But won't this increase production costs? How will you maintain competitiveness?" It was Laura who answered, surprising everyone. "Uncle Ricardo says some things are worth more than money, like Mommy's smile when she teaches someone to sew, or when a child can hug their mum at lunchtime instead of just seeing her asleep." The reporters laughed, charmed, but Ricardo noticed tears in the eyes of several seamstresses present. They, more than anyone, understood the value of those simple words. The most emotional moment came when they reached the showroom. There, on a mannequin of honor, was Laura's unfinished dress, exactly as she had left it that fateful day. Beside it, a golden plaque told its story. "This dress," Ricardo explained, "will never be finished. It will remain Keda, imperfect and honest, as a symbol of our transformation, because it's through its imperfections that we learn our most valuable lesson." Helena, leaning on her cane, approached the dress. With gentle fingers, she touched one of the crooked stitches her daughter had made. "You know," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I spent years trying to achieve perfection. Every stitch, every finish had to be flawless, but my daughter taught me that love doesn't have to be perfect to be valuable." Ricardo watched the scene, feeling a peace he had never experienced in all his years of business success. There they were, Helena and Laura, no longer his employees, but his family. A family that had taught him that sometimes you need to leave something unfinished to start something new and better. The Haute Couture Gala Night promised to be a historic event. The factory's main hall had been transformed into a stunning runway space, with a catwalk that wound its way between the old sewing machines, now part of the decor that told the company's story. Backstage, the buzz was intense. Unlike traditional fashion shows where only professional models participated, this one would be special. Each seamstress would have her moment to shine, walking the runway alongside the pieces she had created. Helena, elegant in an emerald green dress designed by her own students, adjusted the final details of Laura's outfit. "Are you nervous, Mommy?" Laura asked, twirling in her sky blue dress, a miniature version of the sewing school teacher's uniform. "A little," Helena admitted, adjusting the bow in her daughter's hair for the 10th time. "I never imagined I'd be on this side of a fashion show." "Everything will be fine," Laura smiled, hugging her mother carefully so as not to wrinkle their clothes. "Uncle Ricardo said today is about celebrating people, not clothes." On the other side of the improvised dressing room, Ricardo watched the scene with a smile. He himself felt a nervousness different from any other show he had ever organized. This wasn't just a fashion event, it was the official presentation of a new philosophy of work, of life. "Mr. Mendez," Beatrice approached, consulting her clipboard. "The guests are arriving and, well, there's a surprise." "What kind of surprise?" "Roberto is here, with his therapist from the rehab clinic. He brought something for Laura." Ricardo frowned, concerned, but before he could respond, Laura herself appeared at his side. "I heard. Can I see what he brought?" Helena, who had approached, looked apprehensive. "I don't know if that's a good idea, sweetie." "Please." "Mommy?" Dr. Miller said it's part of his recovery to try and fix the things he did wrong. And besides, she held Ricardo's hand. Uncle Ricardo will be with me, won't he? Ricardo knelt in front of Laura, once again admiring the maturity of this child who had changed his life. Always, little one, I'll always be with you. In the small office adjoining the dressing room, Roberto waited nervously. 3 months of intensive treatment had done him good. He was thinner, more focused, his eyes clear and alert. Beside him, a middle-aged woman with an ID badge from the rehab clinic watched attentively. "Hi, Daddy," Laura said softly, still holding Ricardo's hand. Roberto swallowed hard, clearly emotional at hearing the word Daddy. "Hi, Princess. I brought something for you." He held out a package wrapped in colorful paper. "I made it in occupational therapy." Laura carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a small wooden sewing box, hand-painted with delicate flowers. On the lid, carefully carved, were the words, "For my little seamstress." "I know I haven't been a good father," Roberto said, his voice trembling. "Actually, I haven't been a father at all, but I'm trying to change, and when I saw the news about you trying to finish that dress, I realized how much I'd lost because of alcohol." Laura examined the box carefully, running her fingers over the carvings. "It's pretty," she said finally. "Did you make it yourself?" "Yes. It took me 3 weeks. I messed up a lot at first, had to start over several times, but..." He looked significantly at the unfinished dress displayed on a nearby mannequin. "I learned that sometimes imperfections have their value too." Ricardo watched the interaction, his heart tight with emotion. In a few minutes, that hall would be filled with celebrities, journalists, and international buyers. But somehow, he felt that the most important moment of the night was happening. Right there, in that small office, where a family was trying to stitch back together their broken bonds. "The show is about to start," Beatrice announced softly from the door. Laura hugged the sewing box to her chest and, surprising everyone, extended her free hand to her father. "Want to see the show? I'm going on with Mommy. She's a teacher now, you know?" Roberto looked uncertainly at Ricardo, who nodded slightly. I'd love to, Princess." As they walked back to the main hall, Ricardo thought about how life took curious turns. 3 months ago, he had stormed into Helena's apartment ready to destroy lives. Now, he was helping to rebuild them, one stitch at a time, just as Laura had tried to do with that unfinished dress. The lights in the hall dimmed, and a murmur of anticipation rippled through the audience. Instead of the electronic music typical of fashion shows, a soft violin began to play. Ricardo walked onto the stage, his figure illuminated by a single spotlight. "Good evening," he began, his voice carrying an emotion he had never before allowed others to see. 3 months ago, I was a different man, a man who believed that success was measured in numbers, that perfection was the only acceptable measure of quality. He paused, his eyes finding Laura in the front row, sitting between Helena and Roberto. Then, one morning that should have been like any other, I found an 8-year-old child trying to finish a haute couture gown because her mother was too sick to work. That child didn't know it, but her act of love and courage would change not only my life, but an entire industry. The curtains opened, revealing Laura's unfinished dress, illuminated like a work of art. This dress will never be finished. It will remain Kida, imperfect and honest, as a reminder of what truly matters. Every crooked stitch tells a story of love. Every uneven seam speaks of dedication and hope. On the large screen behind him, images of the factory's transformation began to play. The new daycare center full of children, Helena's sewing classes, the seamstresses working in a clean and safe environment, genuine smiles on faces once marked by exhaustion. Tonight, we are not just presenting a new collection, we are presenting a new way of looking at fashion, at work, and at life. Every piece you will see tonight was created with love, respect, and dignity, and every seamstress who created it is here to tell her own story. The show began, but it was unlike any other ever seen in the fashion world. Mothers walked the runway with their children. Elderly seamstresses walked proudly alongside their apprentices, each wearing their own creations. On the label of each piece, besides the brand name, there was a QR code that led to a video telling the story of the artisan who had made it. Helena, leaning on her specially decorated cane, walked with Laura by her side. Both wore matching dresses created by the students of the sewing school. As they passed the spot where Roberto was sitting, Laura blew a kiss to her father, who tried to hide his tears. "These are the true jewels of haute couture," Ricardo continued, his voice echoing through the hall. "Not the expensive fabrics or the perfect finishes, but the hands that create them, the hearts that dedicate love to every stitch." Mariana Alvarez, the influencer who had previously threatened to sue the company, appeared on the runway wearing a professional reinterpretation of Laura's unfinished dress. Her presence caused a stir in the audience, but her smile was genuine as she explained, "This dress represents a revolution. Not just in fashion, but in how we treat each other. Every imperfection in it is a reminder that humanity is more important than perfection." On the large screen, images continued to play, seamstresses sharing stories on the wall of stories, children playing in the new daycare center, Helena teaching her first classes, Laura helping in the children's sewing classes. The transformation was visible not only in the physical environment, but in the smiling faces, the confident postures. "Some have asked me if this wouldn't hurt our profits," Ricardo commented as more seamstresses walked the runway. "The answer is simple. We discovered that when you treat people like family, when you value their stories and their hearts, success comes naturally. Our sales have tripled since we started telling the stories behind each piece." Giorgio, his former partner, who had initially resisted the changes, rose from his seat in the front row and began to applaud. Soon, the entire hall was on its feet, applauding not just the clothes, but the human revolution they were witnessing. Laura, who had returned to her seat after the show, nudged Ricardo. "Uncle Ricardo, can I say something on the microphone?" He smiled, remembering how that same childish voice had changed his world 3 months earlier. "Of course, little one, the stage is yours." Laura climbed the steps confidently, her sky-blue dress shining under the lights. She took the microphone in her small hands and, with the wisdom only children possess, said, "You know why I tried to finish that dress even when I was sick, because my mum always taught me that love is doing something for someone even when it's hard. And now," she smiled at Ricardo, Helena, and even Roberto, "now we have a whole family to teach us about." 6 months after the historic fashion show, haute couture had become a model of business transformation studied in universities around the world. On a sunny Sunday morning, Ricardo walked through the silent corridors of the factory, now unrecognizable compared to the cold, impersonal environment of before. The previously stark white walls were decorated with family photographs, drawings by the daycare children, and inspiring stories from the seamstresses. The wall of stories had expanded, now occupying several panels that told not only of the past, but also the daily achievements of each employee. He stopped before Laura's unfinished dress, still in its place of honor. A new plaque had recently been added, telling how that imperfect piece had inspired a revolution in the fashion industry. 5 other major brands had already adopted the haute couture model of humanized production. "I thought I'd find you here," Helena said, approaching without her cane. Her recovery was progressing every day. Laura's outside, anxious to start the celebration. Ricardo smiled. It was the graduation day of the first class from the sewing school. and Laura had insisted on organizing a small surprise party. "How is she?" "Excited. She spent all morning helping set up the courtyard with the other children. And Roberto..." Helena paused, still getting used to speaking of her ex-husband without bitterness. "He came early to help with the decorations. He's really changed." Indeed, after 6 months of intensive treatment and therapy, Roberto had become a constant and positive presence in Laura's life. He now worked in the factory's maintenance department, repairing sewing machines and building furniture for the daycare center. "You know," Helena continued, distractedly adjusting a photograph on the wall, "sometimes I find myself wondering how a single morning changed so many lives. If you hadn't come to my apartment that day, if I hadn't come, I never would have learned what truly matters," Ricardo completed softly. "I still cringe when I remember I came with a termination packet." "And you ended up gaining a family," Helena smiled. They walked together to the courtyard, where a charming scene awaited them. Colorful tables had been arranged in a circle, decorated with flowers and small sewing projects made by the students. In the center, a cake decorated with miniature sewing. Machines and spools of thread awaited the special moment. Laura, seeing them, ran in their direction. Her new dress, made by herself in the junior sewing school classes, had some crooked stitches and a not quite perfect finish. But her eyes shone with pride. "Uncle Ricardo, look, I made it myself." "Well, the teacher helped a little, but only a tiny bit." Ricardo knelt to admire the work, lovingly noting every small imperfection that told the story of Laura's learning journey. "It's beautiful," he said sincerely. "You know why? Because your heart is in every stitch." The celebration was simple, but profoundly significant. Each graduate of the first sewing school class received not only her diploma, but also a new sewing machine and the promise of a dignified job. Many were women who, like Helena, had faced difficulties raising their children alone. When it was time for speeches, Laura surprised everyone by asking to speak. She climbed onto the small improvised stage, adjusted her handmade dress, and with the touching simplicity of children said, "Did you know this dress I'm wearing has some crooked stitches? I used to get sad when I made a mistake sewing, but Uncle Ricardo taught me that sometimes we need to make mistakes to learn something new. And Mommy taught me that love doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful." There were emotional smiles in the audience. Roberto, sitting beside his therapist, who had come especially for the event, discreetly wiped his eyes. "Now our factory is like a patchwork quilt," Laura continued, using a metaphor she had undoubtedly learned in her sewing classes. "Each person is a different patch, with their own color and their own design. And when we put all these patches together with love, it becomes something much more beautiful than if it were all the same and perfect." Ricardo felt his heart expand with pride and love. He looked around, at the families gathered, at the children, playing without fear, at the seamstresses who were now respected artists of their own stories, and knew he had found his true calling. It wasn't to be a successful businessman, nor the owner of a famous brand. It was to be part of this imperfect and wonderful patchwork quilt, where every crooked stitch told a story of love. Every uneven seam spoke of resilience, and every unfinished piece reminded them that sometimes you need to stop and start over to find the true meaning of family.